Good morning and welcome to the Daily Light Devotion. I hope all of you have had a wonderful Tuesday yesterday and looking forward to today, that is the 24th of June. Today we're going to start a new book in the Old Testament, one of the most famous books quoted, the book of Job, chapters 1 to 3. And in the New Testament, we are going to continue with the book of Acts. So we're going to look at chapter 7, verses 1 to 19. Job chapters 1 to 3 theme suffering, faithfulness, and hope in the midst of pain. This book introduces the Bible's deepest discussion about suffering and faith. Job is a righteous man who suddenly loses his wealth, his children, and his health. These chapters reveal the reality of suffering, spiritual warfare, and the importance of trusting God, the limitations of human understanding, right? Job chapter 1, we see, Job is described as a righteous, as a blameless, upright, God fearing man. Yet Satan challenges Job's devotion, claiming he serves God only because of God's blessing. God permits Job to be tested. In single day, Job loses his livestock, his servants, his children. Despite unimaginable grief, Job responds, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Now, we've made it a song, but I want to tell you something. You know, Job, nowhere in the Bible, Job is one of the oldest books, and nowhere in the book of Job it is written that he was under covenant with God. Yes, he must have learned from about God and trusted God, because when you have faith in the true living God, that was Yahweh in the Old Testament, righteousness was given to you. You know, Abraham did not have righteousness was imputed to Abraham because he had faith in God. He believed God, not because he did some amazing things. And similarly, we have to understand the book of Job. We have to look at it the lens that he was not under covenant. Because a lot of us, when we suffer, we quote the book of Job. But you have to understand we are covenant people, right? Our suffering is because the enemy comes against us. Here the enemy did come against Job, and God allowed it to happen because he did not have a covenant. If he had a covenant, Job, Satan would have had no right. Like God had a covenant with Abraham, he made a covenant with Noah, with David. Though they suffered in the world because of sin, but Job was a complete different picture. And a lot of us misunderstand Job's suffering, right? Most of it was because he did not have a covenant. And that's why God started giving covenants. So we see in Job suffered, though he had done nothing to deserve such a tragedy. Jesus truly is sinless, and one also suffered, though he was completely innocent. Unlike Job, Jesus willingly chose suffering to redeem humanity. Job chapter 2, Satan is permitted to attack Job's body. Painful sores come up him from head to foot. Even Job's wife urges, "Curse God and die." Yet Job refuses to abandon his faith. And that's why the righteousness was imputed to him. Right? Though confused and hurting, he continues trusting God. Three friends arrive and sit silently with him, and 7 days because his grief is so overwhelming. Jesus experienced physical suffering, rejection, loneliness, deep sorrow. Because of his suffering, he understands every pain believers experience. Hebrew 4:15 reminds us that Jesus is our compassionate high priest who sympathizes with our weaknesses. Jesus understands every trial because he walked through suffering himself. Right. Chapter 3, after 7 days of silence, Job finally speaks. He pours out his grief and anguish. He questions why he was born and expresses deep sorrow. And Job does not hide his pain. Is honestly bringing his struggles before God. Jesus also expressed deep sorrow in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful." God is not threatened by our honest prayers. Jesus invites believers to bring their burdens, questions, and pain to Him. Jesus welcomes honest hearts and provides comfort in the suffering. So the key question takeaways is suffering is not always the result of personal sin, right? God remains in power during trials. He intervenes. Jesus understands human suffering completely, Honest prayers are welcomed by God, and faith can remain strong in difficult seasons. Moving over to the book of Acts, chapter 7, verses 1 to 19, we see God's faithfulness through history and unfolding plan. Acts 7 begin with Stephen's powerful defense before the Jewish leaders. Rather than simply defending himself, Stephen recounts God's work throughout Israel's history, God's covenant faithfulness, his power and guidance, and his redemptive plan through generations. Most importantly, Stephen shows that God's plan has always pointed towards Jesus. Verses 1 to 8, Stephen begins with Abraham. God called Abraham to leave his homeland and trust his promises. And God promised a land, a people, and a covenant. Even before Abraham saw fulfillment, he walked faithfully. The covenant with Abraham ultimately points to Christ. Through Jesus, all nations are blessed. God's promises are fulfilled, and salvation becomes available to the world. Jesus is the fulfillment of God's covenant promise. Verses 9 to 16, Stephen recounts the story of Joseph. Joseph's brothers envied him, rejected him, and sold him into slavery. Yet God was with Joseph and eventually exalted him to save many lives. Joseph foreshadows Jesus. Like Joseph, Jesus was rejected by his own people, betrayed, and suffered unjustly. Yet God exalted him, and through him many are saved. What people intended for evil, God turned into salvation. Verses 17 to 19, Stephen explains how God promises continued even when Israel lived under oppression in Egypt. Through circumstances became difficult, God's plan was still moving forward, and nothing could stop his covenant. So, what are some of the key takeaways? God remains faithful to his promises. Jesus fulfills his covenant plan. Rejection does not cancel God's purpose. And God's work continues through difficult circumstances, and his redemptive plan cannot be stopped. So, Job chapter 1 to 3 reveal a faithful man enduring intense suffering while trusting God. Uh, Acts chapter 7, verses 1 to 19 reveal God's faithfulness through generations as he folds his plans of redemption. Today, Jesus still invites us to trust him during challenges and trials. Bring our pain honestly before him, walk by faith like Abraham, believe in God's promises, and rest in his faithfulness throughout every season. Thank you for spending time in the devotion today. Have a blessed day. I will see you tomorrow.